They laughed. Not just a polite chuckle, but the kind that lingers sharp and dismissive, like I wasn't even sitting at my own table. Emily waved her fork toward the old metal box beside my chair. "Mom, seriously, why do you keep all this junk?" Rebecca smirked. Jason didn't even look up. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the edge of the table. That junk held my entire life memories my late husband once told me would matter someday. The next morning, my phone rang. "Is this Leonard Whitcomb?" a calm voice asked. "This is Margaret Collins from a museum in Chicago. I believe your collection belongs in an exhibition." And just like that, everything changed. "Before I go on, I'd really like to hear from you. Have you ever had something deeply meaningful to you dismissed by the people closest to you? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I always read your stories, and they mean more than you might think. If this resonates with you even a little, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep sharing these moments together." The house felt different the morning after that call. Not brighter, not warmer, just louder in its silence. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the kettle as it began to hum, the soft whistle rising slowly like it always did. It was a familiar sound, one that used to blend with Daniel's voice, with the rustle of newspaper pages, with the low hum of the old radio he refused to replace. Now it echoed. I poured the hot water into my favorite chipped mug, the one with the faded blue rim, and carried it to the small table by the window. The same seat I had taken every morning for the past 12 years. Since Daniel passed. 12 years. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. Other times, like another lifetime entirely. I wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. Outside, the Ohio sky was pale and overcast, the kind of morning that made everything feel suspended, like the world hadn't quite decided whether to move forward. Just like me. I glanced toward the hallway where the door to the spare room stood slightly ajar. Most people would have called it a storage room. I didn't. To me, it was everything. I stood up slowly and walked toward it, pushing the door open just enough to slip inside. The air smelled faintly of paper old wood and something else, something softer. Time, maybe. Shelves lined the walls, each one carefully arranged. Not cluttered, not chaotic, organized in a way only I understood. Boxes, tin containers, stacks of letters tied with twine, small objects wrapped in cloth. To anyone else, it might have looked like a room full of forgotten things. But nothing in here was forgotten. I moved to the nearest shelf and picked up a small envelope, its edges worn, the paper yellowed with age. My fingers traced the handwriting, Daniel's handwriting. Strong, steady, just like he had been. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew every word inside. Instead, I placed it back exactly where it belonged, still keeping all that stuff, Mom. The voice cut through the quiet like a blade. I turned sharply. Emily stood in the doorway. Her arms crossed, her expression somewhere between concern and irritation. She hadn't even bothered to knock. "I thought you left last night." Emily stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression somewhere between concern and irritation. She hadn't even bothered to knock. "I thought you left last night," I said softly. "We stayed at a hotel," she replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her heels clicked against the wooden floor, each step precise, controlled. "Jason had an early meeting this morning." "Of course he did." Emily's eyes scanned the room, lingering on the shelves, the boxes, the stacks of carefully preserved memories. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I still don't understand why you keep all of this," she said. "It's not healthy, Mom." I felt something tighten in my chest. "It's not all of this," I replied quietly. "It's my life." She sighed, the kind of sigh you give when you think someone is being difficult on purpose. It's not your life, she said. It's things, old things. You're holding on to the past instead of living in the present. I almost smiled at that. The present. For her, the present was busy, structured, full of meetings, deadlines, schedules. For me, the present was quiet. And in that quiet, the past was all I had left that still felt alive. I am living, I said, just differently than you. Emily shook her head. No, Mom. You're surviving. There's a difference. The words landed harder than she probably intended, or maybe exactly as hard as she intended. Before I could respond, she continued. Look, I didn't come here to argue, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. I've been thinking about what we talked about last night. I already knew where this was going. We really think it's time, she said. This house is too big for you. It's old. It needs repairs. And honestly, her eyes flicked toward the shelves again. It's not safe with all this stuff everywhere. It's organized, I said a little more firmly this time. According to you, she shot back. But what if you fall? What if something happens and no one can get to you because of all this clutter? That word again. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. You're not worried about me falling, I said quietly. Emily blinked, caught off guard. Yes, I am. No, I replied, meeting her eyes. You're worried about what happens to this house if I do. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. For a moment, I saw something flicker across her face, guilt maybe, or irritation at being called out. Then it was gone. That's not fair, she said. Isn't it? She looked away. We just want what's best for you, she insisted. A smaller place, maybe a retirement community, somewhere with people your age, activities, support, and no room for any of this, I added softly. Emily hesitated. Well, you wouldn't need most of it. There it was. Not all of it, not even some of it, most of it, meaning the rest disposable. I turned back to the shelves, running my fingers lightly over a small wooden box Daniel had carved himself. It wasn't perfect. The edges were uneven, the finish slightly rough, but it was one of the most beautiful things I owned, because he had made it for me. I got a call this morning, I said suddenly. Emily frowned. From who? A woman named Margaret Collins, I replied. She's a curator. From a museum in Chicago. Emily's expression shifted, confusion first, then curiosity. A museum, she repeated. I nodded. She said she saw photos of some of my collection online. She believes it might be historically significant. For a second, Emily just stared at me. Then slowly her posture changed, her arms uncrossed, her head tilted slightly. Historically significant, she echoed. Yes. How she asked. I mean, what exactly does that even mean? I don't know yet, I admitted. She wants to come see everything in person. Emily was quiet. Too quiet. I turned to look at her fully now, watching the way her mind worked behind her eyes. Calculating, reassessing. And then I saw it. The shift. The same shelves she had just dismissed as clutter, she was looking at them differently now. Not with understanding, but with value. How much do you think it's worth? She asked. The question came out quickly, almost too quickly. And just like that I knew. Not everything, but enough. I felt the warmth from the tea still lingering in my hands, even though the mug was long gone. That's not why I kept them, I said quietly. Emily didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped further into the room, her gaze moving from one item to another. That might not be why you kept them, she said slowly. But that doesn't mean it doesn't matter now. I watched her, really watched her. This was my daughter, the same little girl who used to sit on this floor asking her father endless questions about the stories behind each object. The same girl who once cried when a single letter went missing for a week. Now she was looking at everything like it was a transaction waiting to happen. "Mom," she said, turning back to me. "If this is real, if what that woman said is true, this could change everything." I felt something inside me shift. Not excitement, not hope, something colder. "What exactly would it change?" I asked. Emily didn't hesitate this time. Everything she said, for all of us. And there it was. Not for me, for all of us. I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure why. Because in that moment, something became painfully clear. The call from the museum hadn't just changed how strangers saw my collection. It had changed how my own family saw me, and somehow that felt even more dangerous. By the time Emily left that morning, the house felt even quieter than before, but not in the comforting way I had grown used to. This silence had weight. It lingered in the corners stretched across the floors, pressed against my chest like something waiting to happen. I didn't go back to the kitchen. I didn't finish my tea. Instead, I stayed in that room, my room, standing among the shelves as if I needed to remind myself that everything was still there, still mine, still intact. But something had shifted. Not in the objects, in the way they were being seen. And once that changes, it's hard to go back. The phone rang again just after noon. I hesitated before answering this time. "Hello, Mrs. Whitcomb. This is Margaret Collins again." Her voice was calm, steady, professional in a way that felt strangely reassuring. "Yes," I said, straightening slightly without realizing it. "I remember. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "No," I replied. "Not at all." A brief pause. "I've been reviewing the images I saw," she continued, "and I'd like to ask a few more questions if that's all right." "Of course." She began asking about specific items, details I hadn't expected anyone outside my home to care about. "Do you recall where the metal container with the military markings came from?" "Yes," I said immediately. My husband brought it home after his service. "And the handwritten letters? Are they all from the same period?" "Mostly," I replied. "Late 1960s, some earlier." She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush me. She listened, really listened. An FME. She listened, really listened. An F, or the first time in a long time, I felt heard. "There's a consistency here," she said after a moment. "A narrative. That's very rare." Narrative. I had never thought of IT that way. To me, it had always just been, or the first time in a long time, I felt heard. "There's a consistency here," she said after a moment. "A narrative. That's very rare." Narrative. I had never thought of it that way. To me, it had always just been life. "I'd very much like to come see everything in person," she continued. "Would tomorrow afternoon work for you?" Tomorrow? So soon? I glanced around the room, suddenly seeing it through someone else's eyes. Not Emily's, not Rebecca's, Margaret's. "I think that would be fine," I said. "Wonderful. I'll bring a colleague with me. We specialize in archival materials and wartime artifacts. I don't want to make any assumptions before seeing everything, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You may have something quite extraordinary here." The line went quiet after that. We said our goodbyes, but her words stayed with me long after I set the phone down. Extraordinary. I wasn't sure I believed it, but I wanted to. The front door opened without warning around 3:00. I didn't even have to look to know who it was. Mom Jason's voice, followed closely by Rebecca's sharper tone. "Are you here?" "In the living room," I called back. They walked in together, still dressed in work clothes. Jason, in his button-down shirt sleeves, rolled halfway up Rebecca in a fitted blazer that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle. They didn't sit. That was the first thing I noticed. They stayed standing like they weren't planning to stay long. "Emily told us about the museum thing," Jason said. "Of course she did." "It's not a thing," I replied gently. "It's just someone coming to take a look." Rebecca let out a small, humorless laugh. "People from museums don't just take a look, Leonard," she said, using my name in a way that felt deliberate. "If they're coming all the way from Chicago, it means there's money involved." There it was again. "Money. Always money. I didn't ask about money," I said. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Well, maybe you should have." Jason shifted slightly, glancing between us. "How serious is this?" he asked. "Did they give you any kind of estimate?" "No," I said. "And I didn't ask for one." Rebecca exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," she said, turning to Jason. "She doesn't even realize what this could be." "I realize enough," I said quietly. "Do you?" Rebecca shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're sitting on something that could be worth a lot of money, and you're treating it like it's just sentimental clutter." The word hit harder this time, maybe because it came after everything else. "Don't," I said, my voice firmer now. Rebecca paused. "Don't what? Don't call it that." For a moment, the room went still. Jason cleared his throat. "Look, Mom," he said, stepping in, trying to soften things. "No one's trying to disrespect you. We're just trying to understand." "Are you?" I asked. He hesitated. Rebecca didn't. "We're trying to make sure you don't make a mistake," she said. "If this collection is valuable, and it sounds like it is, you need to think carefully about what you do next." "I am thinking carefully," I replied. "Then you should consider selling," she said immediately. "At least part of it." "No." The word came out before I even had time to think. Rebecca blinked. "Excuse me, I said no," I repeated. Jason looked surprised. "Mom, I haven't even met this woman yet," I said. "I don't know what she's going to say. I don't know what any of it means. And already you're talking about selling pieces of it. I haven't even met this woman yet," I said. "I don't know what she's going to say. I don't know what any of it means. And already you're talking about selling pieces of it." Rebecca crossed her arms. "That's how these things work." "No," I said. "That's how you work." The tension in the room snapped tight. Jason ran a hand through his hair. "Okay, let's just slow down," he said. "We're getting ahead of ourselves." "No," Rebecca replied, her voice sharper now. "We're not getting ahead. We're being realistic." She turned back to me. "You said they're coming tomorrow." "Yes." "What time?" "Afternoon." Rebecca nodded slowly as if making a decision. "Good," she said. "Well, be here." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. "You don't need to be," I replied. "I think we do," she said. "If this involves something of value, it affects the whole family." There it was again. "Not just me, the whole family." "This is my house," I said. "My collection." "And we're your family," she shot back. "Or does that only matter when it's convenient?" Jason looked uncomfortable now, caught between us. "Rebecca." "No," she said, cutting him off. "This is important. If there's a decision to be made, we should all be part of it." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see concern. I didn't even see curiosity. I saw something else, something colder. Calculation. "You can come if you want," I said finally. "But this isn't a group decision." Rebecca didn't respond right away. She just held my gaze, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled. A small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see about that." After they left, I sat alone in the living room staring at nothing. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, each second louder than the last. I had always known my children didn't understand me. But this was different. This was something else entirely. The call from Margaret Collins had opened a door I hadn't even known existed, and now it felt like everyone was trying to push their way through it, not to see what was inside, but to claim it. I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath. Tomorrow, someone would finally look at my collection and see it for what it truly was. Not clutter, not junk, not something to be sold, but something that mattered. The question was, would that make things better, or would it tear everything apart? That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of what Rebecca said. Not even because of the tension building quietly between my children and me. It was something else. Something deeper. Margaret's voice kept echoing in my mind. "There's a narrative here." A narrative. I had spent years believing I was simply holding on to pieces of a life that had already passed, that I was preserving memories because I didn't know how to let them go. But what if she was right? What if it wasn't just memory? What if it was something more? Around 2 a.m, I gave up trying to sleep. I slipped out of bed, wrapped a cardigan around my shoulders, and walked down the hallway. The house creaked softly under my steps, the familiar sounds grounding me as I made my way to the room. I didn't turn on the overhead light. Instead, I switched on the small lamp in the corner, the warm glow spreading gently across the shelves. Everything looked softer this way. Less like storage, more like something sacred. I walked slowly, my fingers brushing lightly over the edges of boxes, the corners of envelopes, the smooth surfaces of objects worn by time. Each one had a place. Each one had a story. And every story began with him, Daniel. I stopped in front of the old metal container. The same one Emily had pointed at with that dismissive wave of her fork. The same one Margaret had asked about first. I knelt down slowly, my knees protesting just a little, and pulled it toward me. It was heavier than it looked. Always had been. The surface was scratched, marked with faded military stenciling that had softened over the years. I ran my hand across it, feeling the grooves, the dents, the places where time had pressed its weight. Daniel had carried this once. That thought alone was enough to still my breath. I opened it carefully. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it, neatly arranged, protected, preserved. I picked up the first item, a folded piece of paper, thin and fragile. A letter. I unfolded it slowly, the crease lines soft from years of careful handling. "Len," it began. He had always called me that. Not Leonard, not even Lenny like some of our friends. Just Len. Short, simple, his. I read the first few lines, even though I didn't need to. I already knew them by heart. "I don't know if this letter will reach you before I get home," it said. "But if it does, I want you to know that I carry you with me in everything." My throat tightened. I had read this letter 100 times, maybe more. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight it felt like someone else might read it too. Someone who didn't know him. Someone who didn't know us, and still understand. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the container. Next to it sat a small object wrapped in cloth. I hesitated for a moment before unwrapping it. It was a medal. Not polished, not displayed, just kept. Daniel had never been one to talk about his service, not in detail, not in the way people expect. He didn't tell stories to impress. He didn't hold on to recognition for himself. but he held on to things that mattered, quietly, just like this. You keep them, he had told me once, years after he came home. We were sitting right here on this same floor. I don't need them, he said. But they're yours, I replied. He shook his head. No, he said softly. They're part of something bigger than me, and someday someone's going to care about that more than I do. I didn't understand what he meant back then. Not fully. To me, they were his. Proof of what he had done, what he had survived. But to him, they were history. And history in his mind didn't belong to one person. It belonged to everyone who was willing to listen. I sat there for a long time, the metal container open in front of me, the past unfolding piece by piece. There was a map, creased marked with faded pencil lines, a train ticket stub, a photograph of a group of young men, all smiling in a way that only people who haven't yet seen too much can smile. Daniel was in the back row. I traced his face with my finger. You always said it mattered, I whispered. The room didn't answer, but it didn't need to, because for the first time, I was starting to believe it. Morning came too quickly. I must have dozed off in the chair at some point because I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Soft ones. Not Emily, not Rebecca. Grandma? I blinked, lifting my head. Sophie stood in the doorway. She looked different, not in her appearance, but in the way she held herself. Less certain, more hesitant. I didn't know you were up, she said. I wasn't, I replied gently. Not really. She stepped inside slowly, her eyes moving across the room. Unlike the others, she didn't look at everything with judgment or calculation. She looked curious. Can I come in? She asked. You're already in, I said, smiling faintly. She smiled back just a little. Then her gaze landed on the open container in front of me. What's that? She asked. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to tell her, but because I wasn't sure how much she was ready to hear. It's something your grandfather brought home, I said. She moved closer, kneeling beside me. Can I see I studied her face? There was no mockery there, no impatience, just interest, real interest. Yes, I said finally. You can. She leaned in, carefully picking up the folded map. Her fingers were gentler than I expected. Did he draw on this? She asked. Yes. Why? To remember, I said. To make sense of where he had been. She nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense. Then she picked up the photograph. Is that him? She asked, pointing. Yes. She stared at it for a long moment. He looks happy, she said. He was, I replied, at least in that moment. She was quiet after that. Then softly she asked, why didn't anyone ever tell me about this? The question caught me off guard. I thought they did, I said. She shook her head. No. Mom always said it was just old stuff, that you didn't want to let go. I felt something shift in my chest again. Not pain this time. Something closer to clarity. It's not about letting go, I said gently. It's about remembering. Sophie looked at me, really looked at me. And for the first time, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. Understanding. Maybe not complete, but real. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. Maybe this collection wasn't just about the past. Maybe it wasn't just about me and Daniel. Maybe it was about who came next. From the hallway, I heard the front door open again. Louder this time. Heavier footsteps. Voices. Emily. Jason. Rebecca. They were early. Of course they were. Sophie glanced toward the door, then back at me. "They're here," she said. "I know," I replied. And as I slowly closed the metal container, one thought settled firmly in my mind. Today wasn't just about proving the value of what I had kept. It was about deciding who truly deserved to understand it. By the time Margaret Collins arrived, the house no longer felt like mine. It felt occupied, not just physically, though Emily, Jason, and Rebecca had taken over the living room like they owned the place, but emotionally. Every corner seemed to carry a tension that hadn't been there before. Even the walls felt like they were listening, waiting, judging. I stood near the front window watching as a dark sedan pulled up to the curb. "She's here," I said quietly. Rebecca was the first to react. She straightened her blazer, smoothing it down, as if she were about to walk into a business meeting instead of someone else's home. Jason glanced at his watch. Emily didn't say anything, but I could see it in her eyes. That same calculating curiosity from the day before. Only Sophie seemed different. She stood slightly behind me, close enough that I could feel her presence, but not so close that she drew attention to herself. "You okay?" she whispered. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Just stay close," I murmured. She did. The doorbell rang, a simple sound, but it echoed through the house like something far more significant. I took a breath, steadying myself, and walked to the door. When I opened it, the woman standing there looked exactly as her voice had sounded. Calm, composed, intentional. "Mrs. Whitcomb?" she said, offering a warm but professional smile. "Yes," I replied. "I'm Margaret Collins. Thank you for having me." She extended her hand, and I shook it. Her grip was firm, not aggressive, not hesitant, respectful. Behind her stood another man, slightly younger, carrying a leather case. "This is my colleague, Andrew Hayes," she said. "He specializes in archival preservation." Andrew nodded politely. "It's a pleasure. Please," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." As they entered, I felt it immediately. The shift. Not in them, in the room. Margaret's eyes moved carefully, not quickly, not greedily, but with intention. She wasn't scanning for value. She was observing, absorbing, understanding. That alone set her apart from everyone else in the house. "This is my daughter, Emily," I said, gesturing. "My son, Jason, and my daughter-in-law, Rebecca." Margaret greeted each of them politely. Emily smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Rebecca's handshake was firmer than necessary. Jason nodded, reserved. "And this," I added softly, "is my granddaughter, Sophie." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Nice to meet you," she said. Sophie gave a small, almost shy smile. "You too." So Rebecca said, stepping forward just a bit too quickly. "We're all very curious about what you think." Margaret didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned to me. "Would you mind showing us the collection, you too?" "So," Rebecca said, stepping forward just a bit too quickly, "we're all very curious about what you think." Margaret didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned to me. "Would you mind showing us the collection?" she asked. "Not them, not everyone. Me." That mattered. "Of course," I said. I led them down the hallway toward the room. I could hear the others following behind us. Too close, too eager. When I opened the door, something inside me tightened, not fear. Something closer to vulnerability. This room had always been private, sacred. And now it was about to be seen, really seen. Margaret stepped inside slowly. She didn't speak at first. She didn't reach for anything. She just stood there, taking it all in. Andrew did the same, though his gaze was more technical, measuring, assessing, cataloging. But Margaret was different. "This is remarkable," she said quietly. The word hung in the air. Remarkable. Not clutter. Not junk. Remarkable. I felt my throat tighten. "Would it be all right if I took a closer look?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Of course." She moved to the nearest shelf, examining the items one by one, carefully, respectfully. She didn't rush. She didn't skip. She treated each piece as if it mattered, because to her, it did. Rebecca stepped closer to Jason, whispering something under her breath. I didn't catch the words, but I didn't need to. I could feel the impatience building. They wanted answers, numbers, value. Margaret wasn't giving them that, not yet. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the metal container. I hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Yes." She knelt down, opening it with the same care I had shown just hours before. Andrew moved beside her, already pulling on a pair of gloves. They worked in silence for a few minutes, examining, reading, processing. Then Margaret stopped. Her hand hovered over one of the letters. "This," she said softly. "Where did this come from?" "My husband," I replied. "He wrote those during his service." She looked up at me. "How many are there?" "Dozens," I said. "Maybe more." She exchanged a quick glance with Andrew. A silent conversation. Then she looked back at me. "These are primary documents," she said. "First-hand accounts. Personal records from a specific time and place." I nodded, though I didn't fully understand what that meant in her world. In mine, they were just his words. Our words. Combined with the other materials, she continued, gesturing toward the rest of the room. This forms a cohesive historical narrative. Not just individual items, but a story. There it was again. Story. Narrative. I felt Sophie shift slightly beside me. Listening. Really listening. "And this?" Andrew asked, lifting the metal slightly. I felt my breath catch. "That was his," I said. He studied it closely, then looked at Margaret. "This isn't standard issue," he said. Margaret leaned in, examining it more carefully. "No," she agreed. "It's not." She turned it slightly, reading the markings. And then, "This isn't standard issue," he said. Margaret leaned in, examining it more carefully. "No," she agreed. "It's not." She turned it slightly, reading the markings. And then, everything changed. Her expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. "What is it?" Emily asked quickly. Margaret didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood slowly, still holding the medal. "Mrs. Whitcomb," she said, her voice quieter now, more deliberate. "Do you know exactly what this is?" I shook my head. "Daniel never talked about it much." Margaret nodded slowly. "That doesn't surprise me." Rebecca stepped forward. "Well, what is it?" she pressed. Margaret looked at her briefly, then back at me. "This," she said, "may be connected to a very specific unit, one that wasn't widely documented." The room went still. "What does that mean?" Jason asked. "It means Andrew said carefully that if this is authentic, it could be extremely rare." Rebecca's eyes lit up. How rare? Margaret didn't look at her. She kept her gaze on me. Rare enough, she said softly, that it changes everything about what we're looking at here. How rare Margaret didn't look at her. She kept her gaze on me. Rare enough, she said softly, that it changes everything about what we're looking at here. Everything. The word echoed in my mind, the same word Emily had used. But somehow, it felt very different coming from Margaret. Because for her, it wasn't about money. It was about meaning. I looked down at the container, at the letters, at the objects I had spent years protecting. And for the first time, I realized something. This wasn't just my story anymore. And whatever happened next wouldn't just change how others saw this collection. It would change everything about how my family saw me. The question was, would they finally understand, or would they only see what they could take from it? No one spoke for a few seconds after Margaret said that. Not Emily, not Jason, not even Rebecca. It was as if the air had been pulled out of the room and replaced with something heavier, something none of them had expected. Rare enough to change everything. Rare enough to change everything. I felt Sophie's hand brush lightly against my arm, almost instinctively, like she was grounding herself. Or maybe grounding me. Rebecca was the first to recover. What exactly does that mean? Felt Sophie's hand brush lightly against my arm, almost instinctively, like she was grounding herself. Or maybe grounding me. Rebecca was the first to recover. What exactly does that mean? She asked, her voice controlled but sharper now. Are we talking about thousands? Tens of thousands? Margaret didn't answer right away. Instead, she carefully placed the metal back into the container. That's not something I can responsibly estimate without a full evaluation, she said calmly. Rebecca's jaw tightened slightly. But you said it changes everything. Margaret turned her attention to her now, not defensive, not irritated. Just steady. It changes everything in terms of historical significance, she clarified, not just monetary value. There was a subtle shift in her tone when she said it. Not dismissive, but firm. As if she had encountered this exact line of questioning many times before. Rebecca didn't seem satisfied. Well, significance usually comes with value, she pressed. Yes, but firm. As if she had encountered this exact line of questioning many times before. Rebecca didn't seem satisfied. Well, significance usually comes with value, she pressed. Yes, Margaret said, but not all value can be measured the same way. That answer didn't land well. I could feel it. Rebecca stepped back slightly, crossing her arms again, clearly holding herself back from saying more. Jason glanced at me briefly, then at Emily, as if trying to gauge how far this was going to go. Emily, on the other hand, had gone quiet again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was more focused, more observant. She was watching Margaret now, not as a curiosity, but as someone trying to extract information, trying to understand the boundaries. Margaret continued her examination, moving from one item to another. She asked questions, specific ones, dates, origins, context. And every time she spoke to me. Not over me, not around me, to me. Do you remember when this was first stored? Did your husband ever mention where he acquired this piece? Were these letters kept together originally, or did you organize them later? I answered as best as I could. Sometimes with certainty, sometimes with hesitation. But she never made me feel like I should know more than I did. She simply listened, and noted, and respected. That word kept coming back to me. Respect. It had been a long time since I felt it this clearly. After nearly an hour, Margaret stepped back from the shelves. Andrew closed his case, though I noticed he hadn't put everything away. Not yet. Margaret turned to face me fully. "Mrs. Whitcomb," she said, her voice calm, but carrying a new weight. "Now I'd like to speak with you about a potential exhibition." The word hung in the air. Exhibition. Not sale, not auction. Exhibition. Before I could respond, Rebecca stepped forward again. "What kind of exhibition?" she asked quickly. "And where?" And for how long? Margaret glanced at her briefly, then returned her focus to me. "We're currently developing a feature on personal wartime narratives," she said. "Not the official records, the human stories behind them." She gestured gently toward the shelves. "This collection fits that concept exceptionally well." My heart began to beat a little faster. "You mean you'd want all of this?" I asked. "Not necessarily all," she said, "but a curated portion. The pieces that best tell the story." "And what happens to them?" Jason asked. "They would be displayed temporarily." "You mean you'd want all of this?" I asked. "Not necessarily all," she said, "but a curated portion. The pieces that best tell the story." "And what happens to them?" Jason asked. "They would be displayed temporarily," Margaret replied, "under your name, with full credit and context." Rebecca leaned in slightly. "And compensation?" she asked. There it was again. Margaret didn't seem surprised. "There are different models for that," she said. "Some involve loans, some involve acquisitions, some involve partnerships." Rebecca's eyes sharpened. "So you are interested in acquiring pieces. There are different models for that," she said. "Some involve loans, some involve acquisitions, some involve partnerships." Rebecca's eyes sharpened. "So you are interested in acquiring pieces." Margaret paused, then answered carefully. "We're interested in preserving history," she said. "How that happens depends on the owner." "The owner? Not the family? Not all of us?" "The owner." I felt something steady inside me at that word, something I hadn't felt since this all began. Clarity. "Would you be open to discussing that further?" Margaret asked, looking directly at me. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I could feel every pair of eyes in the room turning toward me. Waiting. Expecting. Calculating. "Yes," I said slowly. "I would." Rebecca inhaled sharply, as if she had been holding her breath. "That's great," she said quickly. "We should definitely sit down and go over all the options. As a family." "No," I said. The word came out quietly, but it landed hard. Rebecca blinked. "I'm sorry I said no." I repeated, my voice still calm, but firmer now. "This isn't a family decision." The room went still again. Jason shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I appreciate your concern," I said, cutting him off gently. "But this collection belongs to me." Rebecca's expression tightened. "We're just trying to help you make the right choice." "I am making the right choice," I said. "You don't even know what the options are yet," she snapped. "No," I agreed, "but I know what matters to me." That seemed to hit something. Not understanding, not agreement, but resistance. Rebecca stepped back, shaking her head slightly. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. Emily finally spoke. "Mom," she said, her tone softer now, but still controlled. "No one's trying to take anything from you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, I almost believed her. But then I remembered the way she had looked at the shelves, the way she had asked, "How much do you think it's worth?" And I knew. This isn't about taking, I said quietly. It's about seeing. Emily frowned slightly. What do you mean? I said, gesturing around the room. You all looked at this and saw clutter. Junk. Something to get rid of. I met her eyes. She looked at it and saw a story. No one responded to that. Not immediately, because there was nothing to argue with. Margaret cleared her throat gently, stepping back into the conversation. If it's all right, she said, I'd like to prepare a formal proposal. Something that outlines the exhibition, the terms, and your options. I nodded. I'd like that. I'll have it ready within a few days, she said, and we can discuss everything in detail then. She paused, then added privately. The word was subtle, but deliberate, and I saw it land. Rebecca's expression hardened. Jason looked down. Emily didn't move at all. But Sophie? Sophie smiled. Just a little. As Margaret and Andrew gathered their things, the tension in the room didn't disappear. It shifted. It shifted didn't disappear. It shifted. It settled, like something waiting for the next move. At the door, Margaret turned to me one last time. You've taken very good care of this, she said softly. I nodded. I had a good reason to. She smiled. I can see that. And then she was gone. The door closed. Silence filled the house again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was louder, sharper, more dangerous. Because now there was no pretending anymore. They had seen it. Not as I saw it, but as something valuable. And once people start seeing value, they start wanting control. I turned slowly back toward the hallway, toward the room that had held my life for so many years. And I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. In fact, it was only just beginning. The house didn't erupt the moment Margaret left. It didn't need to. The tension had already built itself into something dense and waiting like a storm that didn't announce itself with thunder, but with silence so heavy it pressed against your lungs. I didn't say anything as I walked back toward the living room. I didn't look at anyone. I just moved slowly, deliberately, like I needed every step to remind me where I stood. Behind me, I could hear them. Whispers first. Low. Sharp. Then, okay, so we need to talk about this, Rebecca. Of course. I stopped, not because I wanted to engage, but because I knew she wasn't going to stop. I turned slowly. Jason stood near the doorway, his arms crossed, his posture tense. Emily leaned against the wall, her face unreadable. Sophie stayed close to me. Always just slightly behind. I don't think there's anything to talk about, I said quietly. Rebecca let out a short laugh. Leonard, there's a lot to talk about. I held her gaze. Not in the way you think. Her expression hardened. Oh, I think I understand perfectly, she said. You have something valuable, potentially very valuable, and now there's an opportunity to do something with it. Do something, I repeated. Yes, she said, her voice rising slightly. Monetize it, protect it, make smart decisions. Smart. I almost smiled. Is that what you think I've been doing all these years? I asked. She frowned. What? Being careless. I continued, not protecting it, not understanding what it means. That's not what I said. It is, I interrupted gently, just in different words. The room went still again. Jason shifted, clearly uncomfortable. Mom, she's not trying to insult you, he said. I know exactly what she's trying to do, I replied. Rebecca stepped forward. And what exactly is that? I didn't hesitate this time. Turn this into something you can control. The words landed cleanly. No anger. No raised voice. Just truth. Rebecca stared at me stunned for half a second. Then her face flushed slightly. That's not fair, she snapped. No, I asked. You're making this about something it's not, she said. We're talking about a real opportunity here, one that could benefit everyone. There it was again. Everyone. Not me, not Daniel, not the story. Everyone. I shook my head slowly. This was never about everyone. That's exactly the problem, she shot back. Emily finally pushed herself off the wall. Can we just calm down for a second? She said, stepping between us slightly. We're all getting emotional. I'm not emotional, Rebecca said quickly. Emily gave her a look. You're raising your voice? Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. Jason rubbed his temples. Look, he said, exhaling. Let's just be practical about this. Practical. Another word that sounded reasonable until you looked at what it was replacing. This curator, Margaret, she clearly thinks this is a big deal. Jason continued. That means we should take it seriously. I am taking it seriously, I said. Then act like it, Rebecca snapped. Sophie shifted beside me. Stop, she said quietly. Everyone turned. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forceful, but it cut through everything. Rebecca blinked. What? I said, stop! Sophie repeated, her voice still calm, but steadier now. You're not listening to her. Rebecca stared at her. I am trying to help. No, you're not, Sophie said. That landed harder than anything else so far, because it wasn't coming from me. It was coming from someone they didn't expect to speak. You didn't even care about this stuff yesterday, Sophie continued. You called it junk. Rebecca's face tightened. That was before we knew what it was. Sophie shook her head. No, she said. That was before you thought it was worth money. Silence. Thick. Unavoidable. Jason looked at Sophie, then at Rebecca, then away again. Emily didn't move, but I could see it. The crack. Just a small one, but real. Rebecca recovered quickly. That's not fair, she said again, though her voice had lost some of its edge. Things change when new information comes in. Sophie didn't argue. She just looked at her. And somehow, that was worse. I stepped forward slightly, placing a gentle hand on Sophie's shoulder. That's enough, I said softly. She nodded, but didn't step back. Not completely. I understand that this feels sudden. I continued, looking at all of them now. I understand that you're trying to process it. Rebecca scoffed quietly, but didn't interrupt. But this isn't new, I said. Not for me. I gestured toward the hallway. That room. Those things, they didn't suddenly become important because someone from a museum said so. No one spoke. They've always been important, I continued. You just didn't see it. Emily looked down. Jason shifted again. Rebecca remained still. I'm not going to sell it, I said. The words settled into the room like something final. Rebecca inhaled sharply. Leonard? I'm not finished, I said, still calm but unyielding now. She stopped. Barely. I'm going to listen to what Margaret has to say, I continued. I'm going to consider the exhibition. I'm going to understand what this means. I paused, then added, but I am not going to turn this into something it was never meant to be. And what is that? Rebecca asked. A transaction, I said. She shook her head. That is naive. No, I replied. It's intentional. The room fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't tense. Not entirely. It was something else. Something closer to distance. Lines had been drawn. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. I think we should go, Emily said finally. Jason looked at her. Yeah, he murmured. Rebecca didn't move at first. Then slowly she grabbed her purse. This isn't over, she said. It wasn't a threat. Not exactly, but it wasn't reassurance either. I know, I said, because I did. This wasn't over. Not even close. They left one by one. The door closed, and once again, the house was quiet. But this time, it felt different. Not empty, not heavy, just clear. Sophie stayed. Of course she did. She always had in ways the others hadn't. You okay? She asked softly. I nodded. Yes. She studied me for a moment. You didn't sound unsure, she said. I'm not, I replied. And for the first time since that phone call, I realized it was true. I wasn't unsure. Not about what mattered, not about what this was, not about what I was going to protect. I looked toward the hallway, toward the room that had held my life for so long. And I understood something now, something I hadn't fully seen before. This wasn't just about preserving the past. It was about preserving the past. It was about defending it. And not everyone deserved to be part of that story. The proposal arrived 3 days later. Not by email, not as a quick summary or a casual message, but in a thick envelope, cream-colored, carefully sealed, my name written across the front, in steady, deliberate handwriting. Leonard Whitcomb. I held it in my hands for a long moment before opening it. There was something about the weight of it, not just physical, but symbolic, that made me hesitate. This wasn't just information. This was direction, possibility, change. Are you going to open it? Sophie asked gently from the kitchen doorway. I glanced up at her. She had been coming by every day since Margaret's visit, not out of obligation, but something else. Curiosity, connection, maybe even loyalty. Yes, I said softly. I just need a moment. She nodded and stepped back, giving me space without leaving entirely. I appreciated that, more than she probably realized. I sat down at the dining table, the same one where they had laughed just days before, and slowly slid my finger under the seal. The envelope opened with a quiet tear. Inside were several documents neatly organized, clipped together. The first page was a letter. Formal, but not cold. Dear Mrs. Whitcomb, it began. Thank you again for welcoming us into your home. I read carefully, line by line. Margaret's tone hadn't changed. It was still measured, still respectful, still focused on the story, not the transaction. But as I moved deeper into the document, the details became clearer, more concrete, more real. The exhibition had a title, Voices Between the Lines. Personal Histories of War. I paused at that. Voices, not objects, not artifacts. Voices. I felt something tighten in my chest, because that's exactly what it had always been. Daniel's voice, captured in ink, held in paper, waiting. The proposal outlined the scope, selected letters, the metal container, the map, the photograph, and the metal, especially the metal. There was an entire section dedicated to it. I read that part twice, then a third time, because the words didn't feel real. Preliminary research suggests that the metal may be linked to an undocumented reconnaissance unit operating under restricted classification during the late 1960s. Undocumented. Restricted. I leaned back slightly, my fingers tightening on the paper. Daniel had never told me that. Not like this. Not in those terms. He had always been quiet about his service. Careful. But I had assumed it was personal, not hidden, not classified. Further verification is required. The letter continued, but if confirmed, this would significantly elevate the historical importance of the collection as a rare first-hand account of a largely unrecorded unit. Rare. Again. That word, but this time, it didn't feel like something external. It felt personal. Because suddenly, the man I had loved for decades, the man I thought I understood, was becoming someone I didn't fully know. Grandma, Sophie's voice pulled me back. She stepped closer, her eyes searching my face. What is it? I hesitated, then handed her the first few pages. Read this, I said. She sat down across from me, her brow furrowing slightly as she scanned the text. I watched her carefully, the way her expression shifted, curiosity, confusion, then something deeper. Wait, she said slowly. Are they saying Grandpa was part of something secret? I exhaled softly. I think they're saying they don't fully know, I replied, but they think he was. Sophie looked back down at the page. That's kind of incredible, she whispered. Incredible, I repeated quietly. It was the same word someone else might have used, but it didn't feel right. Not entirely, because there was something unsettling about it too. Something that didn't quite fit with the man I remembered. The proposal continued. Logistics, insurance, transport, security, everything handled, everything structured, everything professional. But one section stood out more than the rest. Ownership. All items remain the property of Mrs. Leonard Whitcomb. The museum will act solely as a temporary custodian for the duration of the exhibition. I read that line twice, then a third time, because I knew what it meant. Not just legally, but emotionally. This wasn't about taking anything from me. It was about sharing it. On my terms. There's more, Sophie said softly, flipping a page. I leaned forward slightly. What? She hesitated, then read aloud. Given the potential sensitivity of the materials, we recommend discretion until full verification is complete. My stomach tightened. Discretion. Secrecy. Again. It was starting to feel like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed were being placed in front of me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to see the full picture. The phone rang. Sharp. Sudden. It made both of us jump. I didn't need to check the caller ID. I already knew. Hello. Mom, we need to talk. Emily. Her voice was different, tighter, more urgent. What about, I asked, though I already had a feeling. I spoke to someone, she said. A friend of Jason's. He works in acquisitions. Of course he does. And there was a pause. Then he says, if what that curator suggested is even partially true, this could be worth a lot more than we thought. There it was. Again, always back to that. How much, I asked, my voice steady. Another pause. Potentially 6 figures, she said. 6 figures. The number hung in the air, heavy, loud, empty. I didn't feel excitement. I didn't feel relief. I felt distance. Because suddenly, everything Margaret had said, everything I had felt was being translated into something else, something smaller. I'm coming over, Emily said quickly. We need to go through everything, carefully. No, I said. The word came out before she could finish. Silence. Mom! No, I repeated. This time slower, clearer. This isn't something we're going to go through together. You don't understand. I understand exactly what you're saying. I interrupted gently. And I understand why you're saying it. Then why are you? Because that's not what this is, I said. My voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. This is not an inventory, I continued. It's not an asset list. It's not something to be picked apart and priced. Emily exhaled sharply. You're being emotional. No, I said. I'm being honest. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, you're going to regret this, she said quietly. And just like that, the line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the phone still in my hand. Sophie didn't speak. She didn't need to, because we both felt it. The shift. Not just tension anymore. Something deeper, more dangerous. I slowly set the phone down, then turned back to the table, to the proposal, to Daniel's story, to everything that had been quietly waiting all these years. I think Sophie said carefully, "This is bigger than any of us thought." I nodded. Yes, I said, it is, but not in the way they meant. Not in numbers, not in value, not in what it could be turned into. It was bigger because it was finally being seen for what it truly was. And now that it was, I knew something with absolute certainty. I wasn't just protecting objects anymore. I was protecting the truth. And something told me not everyone was going to like what that truth revealed. That night, I didn't read the proposal again. I didn't need to. Every word had already settled somewhere deep inside me, heavy quiet, impossible to ignore. Instead, I sat in the living room with the lights dimmed, the envelope resting on the table in front of me, like something alive. Sophie had gone home an hour earlier. She had hugged me before leaving. Not casually, not quickly, but with intention. I think you're doing the right thing, she whispered. I hadn't answered, not because I disagreed, but because I wasn't sure there was a right thing anymore. Only choices and consequences. The house felt too still, not peaceful, not comforting, just watchful, as if something was waiting to happen. And then the knock came. 3 sharp taps on the door. Not a doorbell, a knock. Deliberate. I didn't move right away, because something about it didn't feel normal, didn't feel familiar. Then it came again, louder this time. I stood slowly, my heart beginning to beat just a little faster, and walked toward the door. When I opened it, I wasn't surprised to see Jason standing there, but I was surprised to see that he was alone. No Rebecca, no Emily, just him. Mom, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Jason? He looked different, not tense, not defensive, just tired. Can I come in? He asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. Yes. He didn't go to the living room. He didn't sit. He just stood in the entryway, looking around like he wasn't entirely sure why he had come. I got your message, I said. He nodded. I know. Silence stretched between us. Uncomfortable, but not hostile. Not like before. I didn't come to argue, he said finally. I didn't expect you to. He let out a small breath, almost like a laugh. Good, he muttered. Then he rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "I think things got out of hand the other day," he said. I didn't respond, because they had, but not in the way he meant. "I mean, Rebecca, he trailed off, searching for the words. "She sees things in a certain way." "Yes," I said. "I noticed." He gave a small, embarrassed smile. "She's practical." I looked at him. "And you?" I asked. The question caught him off guard. What do you see?" I asked. He hesitated, then looked down. "I don't know," he admitted. That was the first honest thing anyone had said in days. I didn't think much of it before he continued. "The stuff in that room, I just thought it was you holding on." I said softly. He nodded. "Yeah." But now he exhaled slowly. "Now it feels like something else." I waited. "Like there's something we missed," he said. There it was. Not money. Not value. Something closer to understanding. "Maybe there is," I said. He glanced toward the hallway, toward the room. "Can I see it again?" he asked. I studied him carefully. Not suspicious, just careful. "Yes," I said. We walked down the hallway together, slower than before, quieter. When I opened the door, he didn't rush in. He stepped inside like he was entering a place he didn't fully understand, which in a way, he was. He looked around, his eyes moving from shelf to shelf. Not quickly, not dismissively, just taking it in. "I never realized how much there was," he said. "There's a lot you never realized," I replied gently. He didn't argue. He stopped in front of the metal container. "The curator, she seemed really focused on this," he said. "Yes." Why, I walked over and knelt beside it, opening it slowly. "Because it holds the beginning of everything," I said. He crouched down beside me. I handed him one of the letters. "Read it," I said. He hesitated for a moment, then unfolded it carefully. His eyes moved across the page, slowly, and as he read, I watched his face change. Not dramatically, but enough. His jaw tightened slightly, his brow furrowed. Then he swallowed. "This is," he said quietly, trailing off. "Personal," I offered. He nodded. "Yeah." He kept reading, and the longer he did, the quieter he became. After a while, he folded the letter and handed it back to me. "He never showed me these," he said. "No," I replied. "He didn't." "Why not?" I thought about that for a moment, then answered honestly. "Because they weren't for you," I said. He looked at me, not hurt, not angry, just confused. "They were for me," I continued, "and someday, maybe for someone who needed to understand him." Jason looked down at the container again. "And you think that's happening now?" he asked. "I think it already started," I said. He nodded slowly, then reached for the photograph. The one with Daniel and the other young men. He studied it for a long moment. "That's him," he said. "Yes, he looks." Jason hesitated. "Younger," I offered. He shook his head. "Hopeful." The word surprised me, because it was exactly right. "Yes," I said softly. He was. Jason set the photograph down gently, then leaned back slightly, sitting on the floor beside me. "I didn't know him like this," he said. "No," I replied. "You didn't." He didn't take that as an accusation, just a fact. "I think he began," then stopped. "What?" I asked. "I think I was wrong," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. I think we all were. I didn't respond right away, because part of me wanted to hold on to that moment, not as victory, not as validation, but as something real, something honest. Maybe I said finally. He looked at me. What are you going to do? He asked. With the museum. I glanced at the container, at the letters, at everything Daniel had left behind. I'm going to let them tell the story, I said. Jason nodded slowly. And the rest of it, he asked. I knew what he meant. The family, the tension, the choices that were coming. I don't know yet, I admitted, and for the first time, that felt okay. We sat there in silence for a while, not uncomfortable, not strained, just I knew what he meant. The family, the tension, the choices that were coming. I don't know yet, I admitted, and for the first time, that felt okay. We sat there in silence for a while, not uncomfortable, not strained, just quiet. And then Jason said something I didn't expect. I think Rebecca is going to push harder, he said. I didn't look at him. I know. She won't let this go, he added. I know that too. He hesitated. Then, I don't think she's wrong about everything, he said carefully. I turned to him. No, I agreed. She's not. He seemed relieved by that. But she's not right about the most important part, I added. Jason frowned slightly. Which is... I met his eyes. This isn't about what it's worth, I said. It's about what it means. He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded, slowly. I think I'm starting to understand that, he said. And in that moment, for the first time since all of this began, I believed him. But belief was only the beginning. Because understanding something and standing by it were two very different things. And something told me we were about to find out exactly which one mattered more. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. Not peace, not relief, but clarity. The kind that doesn't come from having answers, but from finally knowing which questions matter. The proposal sat exactly where I had left it on the table, untouched, unmoved. But everything about it had already shifted something inside me. I made coffee, slowly letting the routine ground me. The familiar rhythm, the kettle, the cup, the quiet hum of the kitchen, felt like a reminder that not everything had changed. Not yet. But it would. I could feel that. At exactly 9:12 a.m., my phone rang. This time, I checked the screen. Rebecca. Of course. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it stopped. A few seconds later, it rang again. I closed my eyes briefly, then answered. Hello? Leonard, we need to talk. No greeting, no pretense, straight to it. I think we've done enough talking, I replied calmly. No, she said quickly. We haven't even started. I leaned against the counter, holding the phone loosely. I received the proposal, I said. I know, she replied. Emily told me. Of course she did. And Rebecca pressed. What did it say? It said exactly what Margaret already told us, I said. An exhibition, a story, preservation. Rebecca exhaled sharply. And the value, I almost smiled. There was no number attached to it. That doesn't mean there isn't one, she snapped. No, I agreed. It means it's not the point. There was a pause. Then her voice dropped slightly, more controlled, more strategic. Leonard, Listen to me carefully, she said. This is bigger than you realize. I looked out the window, watching the light stretch across the front yard. I realize exactly how big it is, I said. Then act like it, she insisted. You're sitting on something that could change everything for this family. There it was again. Everything. But I was starting to understand something about that word. To Rebecca, everything meant expansion, opportunity, gain. To me, it meant responsibility. This isn't about changing everything, I said quietly. It should be, she replied immediately. No, I said. It shouldn't. Silence. Then, you're being selfish. The word didn't hit the way she expected. It didn't sting. It didn't shake me. It just settled. Am I asked. Yes, she said. You're making a decision that affects all of us without including us. I let that sit for a moment, then answered carefully. This doesn't affect all of you, I said. It does, if you're ignoring what it's worth. No, I said. It doesn't. My voice didn't rise, but it didn't soften either. It affects me. This doesn't affect all of you? I said. It does if you're ignoring what it's worth? No, I said. It doesn't. My voice didn't rise, but it didn't soften either. It affects me, I continued, because it's mine, because I lived it, because I carried it. There was a pause, longer this time. And what about your children? She asked finally. What about their future? I felt something shift slightly at that. Not doubt, but recognition, because that was the argument she believed would reach me. Daniel's story is not a retirement plan, I said. The line went quiet again. Then, you're making a mistake, she said, her voice colder now. Maybe, I replied, but it will be my mistake. And with that, I ended the call. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It wasn't tense. It was earned. I set the phone down and stood there for a moment, letting everything settle. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I picked up the proposal, and I wrote on it. Not notes, not corrections. A decision. At the bottom of the final page beneath Margaret's signature, I wrote, I agree to proceed with the exhibition under the conditions outlined. Leonard Whitcomb. My hand didn't shake. Not even a little. Sophie arrived just as I was placing the papers back into the envelope. You look different, she said the moment she saw me. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Different how? Lighter, she said. I considered that, then nodded. Maybe I am. She stepped inside, glancing at the envelope. Is that... Yes, I said. It is, and I held it up slightly. I signed it. Her eyes widened. Wait, really, yes. A slow smile spread across her face. That's amazing. I shook my head gently. No, I said. It's just right. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. I think Grandpa would like that. I swallowed quietly. I think so too. But the moment didn't last, because just as quickly as the calm had settled in, it shifted, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Fast. Too fast. Sophie turned toward the window. Oh no, she murmured. I didn't need to look. I already knew. The front door opened without knocking, and there she was, Rebecca, followed closely by Emily, Jason just behind them. Their energy filled the house instantly. Sharp, urgent, uninvited. We need to talk. Now, Rebecca said, stepping fully into the room. I didn't move. I'm listening, I said. Emily looked at the envelope in my hand. What's that? She asked. I held her gaze. My decision. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. What did you do? I didn't hesitate. I agreed to the exhibition. The reaction was immediate. What? Rebecca snapped. You signed it? Emily asked, stunned. Jason just stared. You didn't even discuss it with us, Rebecca said, her voice rising. I didn't need to. Yes, you did, she shot back. This affects... Stop, I said. And this time... My voice cut through the room. This time, my voice cut through the room. Not loud, but absolute. Rebecca froze. Emily didn't speak. Jason shifted uncertain. This does not belong to you, I said clearly. It does not belong to this family. It does not belong to anyone but me. You can't just... I can... Not loud, but absolute. Rebecca froze. Emily didn't speak. Jason shifted uncertain. This does not belong to you, I said clearly. It does not belong to this family. It does not belong to anyone but me. You can't just... I can, I said. And I held her gaze until she stopped talking. The room went quiet. Not tense, not explosive, just still. Because for the first time, there was no room left for negotiation. I'm not selling it, I continued. I'm not dividing it. I'm not turning it into something it was never meant to be. Because for the first time, there was no room left for negotiation. I'm not selling it, I continued. I'm not dividing it. I'm not turning it into something it was never meant to be. Rebecca shook her head in disbelief. You're throwing away an opportunity. No, I said. I'm honoring one. No one responded to that. Because there was nothing left to argue. Not really. I placed the envelope back on the table, and for the first time since all of this began, I felt something settle inside me. Not doubt, not fear, but certainty. And something told me that was what scared them the most. No one moved after I said it. Not Rebecca, not Emily, not even Jason. The envelope sat on the table between us, simple, quiet, but suddenly the most powerful object in the room. Because it wasn't just paper anymore. It was a decision, and they all knew it. You signed it without even telling us, Rebecca said finally, her voice low but shaking with contained frustration. I didn't look away. Yes, that's unbelievable. No, I replied calmly. What's unbelievable is that you still think you were supposed to be part of that decision. Her eyes flashed. We are part of this family. And this, I said, gesturing toward the envelope, is not a family asset. Emily stepped forward slightly. Mom, please just listen for a second, she said, her tone softer now, but not softer in feeling. Softer in strategy. I had seen that tone before. It was the one she used when she wanted control without confrontation. I have been listening, I said. That's the problem. Jason exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Can we just take a step back, he said. Everyone's on edge. No, Rebecca snapped. We're past that. She turned back to me. You don't get to make a decision like this in isolation. I just did, I said. And the silence that followed was sharper than any argument. Emily's expression changed. Not anger, not frustration, something else, something colder. You're shutting us out, she said. No, I replied. I'm drawing a line against your own children. The words were meant to wound, but they didn't land the way she expected. Against behavior that doesn't respect what this is, I said. Her jaw tightened. You keep saying that, she said. but you won't even consider that maybe we're trying to protect you." "From what I asked? From being taken advantage of?" she said quickly. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how misplaced it was. "The only people trying to take control of this," I said quietly, "are standing in this room." That landed hard. Jason looked away. Rebecca stiffened. Emily didn't respond. "Because she couldn't. You don't trust us," Rebecca said after a moment. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I considered it, then answered honestly. "Not right now," I said. The truth hung in the air. Uncomfortable. Unavoidable. Rebecca let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Wow," she muttered. That's really something." "Yes," I said, "it is." Sophie shifted beside me, but she didn't speak this time. She didn't need to, because something had changed. This wasn't a disagreement anymore. It was a divide. Clear, unmistakable. "So, what now?" Jason asked quietly. I looked at him. "Now I said we move forward." "With the museum?" he asked. "Yes, and that's it," Rebecca cut in. "We just sit back and watch while you hand over something that could change our lives." I turned to her. "I'm not handing it over," I said. "I'm sharing it." "With strangers," she snapped. "With people who understand its value," I corrected. "We understand its value," she shot back. "No," I said. "You understand its price." The difference hit like a crack through glass. And for a moment, no one spoke. Emily stepped forward again, slower this time. More careful. "Mom," she said quietly, "what if you're wrong?" The question lingered. Not aggressive, not defensive, just honest. What if you're putting your trust in someone who doesn't have your best interest at heart? I met her eyes. And for the first time, I saw something real there. Not manipulation, not calculation. Fear. And that made my answer softer. But not weaker. "Then I'll deal with that," I said. "But I'd rather risk being wrong about someone who respects this." I gestured toward the hallway. "Than be right about people who didn't." Emily flinched slightly. Not visibly, but enough. Jason took a step forward. "Mom, I meant what I said yesterday," he said. "I'm trying to understand." I nodded. "I know, and I do," he continued. "I see it now. I really do." He glanced at Rebecca, then back at me. "But this is moving fast," he added. Too fast. I considered that. He wasn't wrong. It was fast. But that didn't make it wrong. "Sometimes," I said, "waiting is just another way of avoiding the truth." Jason frowned slightly. "I'm not avoiding anything." "No," I said gently, "but you're hesitating. And that's a bad thing." "It is," I said, "when the moment matters." Rebecca threw her hands up slightly. "This is pointless," she said. "You've already made up your mind." "Yes," I said, "and nothing we say is going to change that." "No." She stared at me for a long moment, then shook her head. "I don't even recognize you right now. That one landed differently. Not painful, but reflective." "Maybe that's because you never really saw me before," I said. Silence. Again. But this time, it wasn't just tension. It was realization. For all of us. Emily looked down. Jason rubbed his face. Rebecca stood still, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. And Sophie. Sophie reached for my hand. Gently. Quietly. Like she had always known exactly where she belonged. "We're leaving," Rebecca said, finally. Not angrily, not dramatically, just firmly. Jason nodded. Emily hesitated for a second longer, then followed. At the door, Jason paused. He turned back to me. "He'll call you," he said. I nodded. "I'll answer," I replied. Because I would. Just not the same way as before. The door closed, and once again, the house fell into silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't uncertain. It was settled. Because something had finally been said. Something that couldn't be taken back. Something that changed everything. Sophie squeezed my hand lightly. "You okay?" she asked. I looked around the room, at the envelope, at the hallway beyond it, at the life I had protected for so long. And I realized something. "I am," I said. And for the first time, I truly meant it. Because the truth was, this was never just about a collection. It was about being seen, being heard, being respected. And now that I had drawn the line, there was no going back, only forward, no matter who chose to walk that path with me. The house stayed quiet for the rest of the afternoon. Not the kind of quiet that felt empty, but the kind that follows a storm when everything is still, but the air hasn't quite settled yet. Sophie didn't leave. She moved around the kitchen making tea. I didn't ask for, straightening things that didn't need straightening. It wasn't about the tasks. It was about staying. And I let her, because for the first time in days, I didn't want to be alone with what was coming next. "They're not going to let this go," Sophie said, eventually setting a cup in front of me. I nodded. "I know. You okay with that?" I looked down at the tea, watching the faint steam curl upward. "No," I said, honestly, "but I'm ready for it." She studied me carefully. "What changed, I know. You okay with that?" I looked down at the tea, watching the faint steam curl upward. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm ready for it." She said, honestly, "But I'm ready for it." She studied me carefully. "What changed?" she asked. I thought about that, really thought about it. Before I said slowly, I was reacting. To them. Yes, I said. To their opinions, their expectations. They studied me carefully. "What changed?" she asked. I thought about that, really thought about it. Before I said slowly, I was reacting. To them? Yes, I said. To their opinions, their expectations, their assumptions. And now I looked up at her. Now I'm deciding. She smiled slightly. "That's a big difference." "It is," I said, "and it's going to cost you." That part didn't sound like a question. "No," I said quietly. "It already has." We didn't speak much after that. We didn't need to, because the weight of what had happened and what was coming was already filling the space between us. That evening, just as the sun began to dip low enough to cast long shadows across the living room floor, the phone rang again. This time, I almost didn't answer. But something in me said I should. "Hello, Mrs. Whitcomb, Margaret." Her voice was exactly the same as before, calm, composed, grounded. "Yes," I said. "This is Leonard. I received your signed agreement," she said. "Thank you." I exhaled slowly. "You're welcome." There was a brief pause, not awkward, just intentional. "I wanted to speak with you personally," she continued, "before we proceed." Something in her tone shifted slightly. Subtle, but noticeable. About what? I asked. About the metal? My grip tightened on the phone. What about it? Another pause. Longer this time. We've begun preliminary verification, she said, and we've encountered something unexpected. My heart skipped. Unexpected how Margaret chose her words carefully. There are records, she said, that suggest your husband's unit may not have been officially recognized for certain operations. I frowned slightly. I don't understand. It means, she continued gently, that what he did may not have been fully acknowledged. Not publicly. Not even internally. The room suddenly felt colder. And the metal? I asked. That's the unexpected part, she said. I didn't breathe. There's no official record of it being issued. The words didn't make sense at first. No record, I repeated. None, she said. Not in the usual channels. I sat down slowly. That doesn't mean it's not real, she added quickly. In fact, it may mean the opposite. How? Because unofficial recognitions were sometimes given in circumstances that couldn't be documented. That doesn't mean it's not real, she added quickly. In fact, it may mean the opposite. How? Because unofficial recognitions were sometimes given in circumstances that couldn't be documented, she explained. Particularly in operations that were sensitive, restricted, unrecorded, the same words, again and again. What are you saying? I asked quietly. Margaret's voice softened. I'm saying your husband may have been involved in something far more complex than we initially thought. I closed my eyes for a moment. Daniel. The man who barely spoke about his service. The man who kept his memories tucked away in letters instead of conversations. What had he been carrying all those years? There's something else, Margaret said. My eyes opened. What? We'd like to bring in a historian, she said. Someone who specializes in undocumented military operations. Why? Because if what we suspect is true, she replied, this isn't just a personal story anymore. I felt my chest tighten. It's part of a larger one. I swallowed slowly. And what does that mean for me? It means, she said carefully, that there may be attention. Questions. Interest from outside the museum. Outside. The word echoed louder than anything else. What kind of interest? I asked. Margaret hesitated. Possibly governmental, she said. The room went completely still. Governmental. Not collectors. Not historians. Something bigger. Something official. I thought this was just an exhibition, I said quietly. It still is, she reassured me. But sometimes history doesn't stay contained. I let that sit, because I understood exactly what she meant. Once something is seen, it can't be unseen. Do you still want to proceed? She asked gently. The question wasn't just procedural. It was personal, important, and for a moment, I hesitated. Not because I doubted the decision, but because I was finally beginning to understand the full weight of it. This wasn't just about sharing Daniel's story anymore. It was about uncovering it. And once that started, there would be no stopping it. I looked toward the hallway, toward the room, toward everything he had left behind, and I thought about the man I had known, the man I had loved, the man who had trusted me with all of it. Yes, I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. I want to proceed. Margaret didn't respond right away. Then, all right, she said softly. We'll move forward carefully. Carefully. I almost smiled, because I had a feeling. Careful wasn't going to be enough. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time. Not moving, not thinking, just feeling. Sophie walked in a few minutes later. She took one look at my face and stopped. "What happened?" she asked. I looked up at her, and for the first time since this began, I felt something close to fear. "Daniel," I said slowly. "There's more to his story." Sophie didn't speak. She just waited. Because she knew that whatever came next was going to change everything. And this time, not just for me. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel not as the man I had known in our quiet kitchen reading the newspaper with his glasses low on his nose, but as someone else. Younger. Hidden. Carrying something I had never been allowed to fully see. And now, somehow, it was all coming back. Not to him, but to me. By morning, the house felt different again. Not calm, not tense, but exposed. Like something had been uncovered, and the walls themselves hadn't caught up yet. Sophie arrived early, earlier than usual. She didn't knock. She just walked in quietly like she had already learned the rhythm of this place. "You didn't sleep," she said immediately. I shook my head. "No." She didn't ask why. She already knew. "Do you want to tell me?" she asked gently. I sat at the table, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "Margaret called," I said. Sophie pulled out the chair across from me, and I took a slow breath. "There's no official record of the medal." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said carefully, "that whatever Daniel did, it wasn't meant to be documented." Sophie leaned back slightly. "That sounds, there's no official record of the medal." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said carefully, "that whatever Daniel did, it wasn't meant to be documented." Sophie leaned back slightly. "That sounds serious?" "It is, and the museum still wants to move forward." "Yes." "But now it's bigger, right?" she asked. I nodded. "Much bigger." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, are you scared?" The question caught me off guard. Not because it was unexpected, but because no one else had asked it. Not Rebecca, not Emily, not even Jason. They had all asked about value, about control, about outcomes, but not fear. "Yes," I said. The word came out softer than I expected. "I am." Sophie nodded. "That makes sense." I looked at her. "Does it?" "Yes," she said simply, "because now it's not just your story anymore." That hit deeper than anything Margaret had said, because it was true. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Not sharp, not aggressive, just firm. Sophie glanced toward the hallway. "Are you expecting someone?" "No." I stood slowly, my chest tightening slightly as I walked toward the door. Something about it felt different, heavier. When I opened it, two men stood on the porch, both in their late 50s, maybe early 60s. One held a leather folder. The other stood slightly behind him, hands clasped in front of him. "Mrs. Whitcomb?" the man in front asked. "Yes, my name is Robert Hayes," he said, holding up a badge, not aggressively, but clearly enough that I could see it. My breath caught. "I'm with the Department of Defense." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "And this is my colleague Thomas Reed," he added. The second man nodded politely. "We were hoping to speak with you," Robert continued, "about your husband." For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even fully process what was happening. Sophie stepped closer behind me, her presence grounding me just enough to respond. "What is this about?" I asked carefully. Robert exchanged a brief glance with Thomas. "May we come in?" he asked. I hesitated. Every instinct in me said this was the moment Margaret had warned me about. Attention, questions, interest. But this was something else. "Yes," I said, finally. I stepped aside. They entered quietly, respectfully. Not like Rebecca, not like Emily. They didn't fill the space. They acknowledged it. We sat in the living room. No one rushed, no one pushed, but the air was thick with something unspoken. "I understand you've been in contact with the museum curator," Robert began. "Yes, and that you've agreed to an exhibition involving your husband's personal effects." "That's correct." He nodded. "We were notified as part of a verification process." Of course they were. Nothing like this stayed contained. "There's something you should know," Thomas said, speaking for the first time. His voice was quieter, measured. "Your husband's name appears in a set of declassified documents that were only recently made available." My stomach tightened. "Declassified?" I repeated. "Yes," he said. Robert leaned forward slightly. The unit he was attached to unofficially was involved in operations that were not publicly acknowledged at the time. The same words. Again. But now from a different source. A more official one. "What kind of operations?" I asked. Robert hesitated, then chose his words carefully. "Reconnaissance, extraction, intelligence gathering." I swallowed, and the metal Thomas exchanged a glance with Robert. "That's the complicated part," he said. "There are references to commendations," Robert added, "but no formal record of issuance. So, it's real?" I asked. "Yes," Thomas said, "but it was never meant to be public." The room went silent. Sophie didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel her watching everything, taking it in. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Robert sat back slightly. "Because if this exhibition moves forward, it will bring attention to things that were never intended to be widely known." "And that's a problem?" I asked. "Not necessarily," he said, "but it comes with implications." "What kind of implications?" Thomas spoke this time. "Questions, media interest, potential reinterpretation of historical events. In other words, exposure. And what do you want from me?" I asked. Robert didn't hesitate. "We want you to be fully informed. That's all." A pause. Then, "And we'd like to request that you consider the impact of sharing certain materials." There it was, not an order, not a demand, but a suggestion, a careful one. I looked at them both, at their calm expressions, at the weight behind their words. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Did my husband do something wrong? The room froze. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough. Robert's expression softened. "No," he said. "Not by any standard that matters." Thomas nodded. In fact, he added quietly, "It appears he did quite the opposite." I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not doubt, but something stronger, something steadier. "Then his story deserves to be told," I said. My voice was calm, clear, unshaken. Robert studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I thought you might say that." They didn't stay much longer. They didn't argue, didn't push. They simply left me with the truth and the weight of what came with it. After the door closed, Sophie finally spoke. "Wow," she whispered. I let out a slow breath. "Yes, that just happened." "Yes," I repeated. She looked at me. "So what now?" I turned toward the hallway, toward the room, toward everything Daniel had left behind. And for the first time, I didn't see uncertainty. I didn't see doubt. I saw purpose. "Now," I said quietly, "we tell his story." Because no matter how complicated it was, no matter who tried to control it, no matter how much it revealed, it was still his, and I was done letting anyone else decide what to do with it. The museum smelled like polished wood and quiet reverence. It wasn't loud, it wasn't crowded, but it was alive. Not in the way a busy place is alive with noise and movement and distraction, but in a deeper way. Every wall held a story. Every display carried a voice. And somehow, now Daniel's voice was among them. I stood just inside the entrance of the exhibition hall. My hands clasped tightly in front of me. Sophie stood beside me, her eyes wide as she took everything in. "Grandma," she whispered. I didn't answer, because I couldn't, not yet. At the far end of the room, a soft spotlight illuminated a glass case. Inside it, the metal container. Daniel's letters, the photograph, the map, and the medal. A, the photograph, the map, and the medal. A L arranged with care, with intention, with respect, not scattered, not reduced, but honored. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Margaret's voice came gently from behind us. I turned. She smiled not professionally this time, but warmly, almost arranged with care, with intention, with respect, not scattered, not reduced, but honored. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Margaret's voice came gently from behind us. I turned. She smiled not professionally this time, but warmly, almost personally. "It's ready," she said. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "Would you like me to walk you through it?" she asked. I hesitated, then shook my head. "No," I said softly. "I think I need to see it on my own." Margaret understood immediately. "Of course," she said. She stepped back, giving me space, the same way she always had. I took a slow step forward, then another. Each movement felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, but emotionally, because with every step I was letting go of something. Not the collection, not Daniel, but the way it had been mine alone. The first display was simple, a single letter, framed, preserved, the handwriting clear, familiar. "Len," it began. My breath caught. They had chosen that one. Of all the letters, that one. I stepped closer, reading the words I had known for decades. But somehow they felt different here. Larger. Stronger. Because now they weren't just mine. They were being seen. Understood. Next to the letter was a small plaque. I forced myself to read it. Private correspondence from an unidentified reconnaissance unit, late 1960s. These letters offer rare insight into the personal experiences of soldiers operating under restricted classification. I forced myself to read it. Private correspondence from an unidentified reconnaissance unit, late 1960s. These letters offer rare insight into the personal experiences of soldiers operating under restricted classification. Unidentified, restricted, but not forgotten. I moved slowly through the exhibit. Each piece revealed something. Not new, but newly seen. The map with Daniel's markings. The photograph now enlarged, the young faces clearer. the quiet hope in their eyes more visible than ever. And then, the final case, the medal. It sat alone, centered, not surrounded by explanation, not overwhelmed with context, just present, a single line beneath it. An unrecorded recognition for an unrecorded act. I stared at it for a long time, because suddenly it all made sense. Daniel hadn't hidden his story. He had protected it, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Some things weren't meant to be explained, only remembered. You did this. The voice behind me was quiet, familiar. I turned. Jason. He stood a few steps back, his expression unreadable but not distant. Not like before. You came, I said. He nodded. Yeah. There was a pause. Then I had to see it. I stepped aside slightly, giving him space. He moved forward slowly, his eyes scanning the displays. Taking it in. Really taking it in. I didn't get it, he said after a while. I know. He nodded. But I do now. I didn't respond. Because this wasn't about hearing it. It was about whether he meant it. It's not about the stuff, he continued. No. It's about him. But I do now. I didn't respond. Because this wasn't about hearing it. It was about whether he meant it. It's not about the stuff. Meant it. It's not about the stuff, he continued. No, it's about him. Yes, and you. That surprised me. I looked at him. What do you mean? He gestured toward the exhibit. You kept all of this, he said. Not because it was valuable, but because it mattered, he continued. No. It's about him. Yes, and you. That surprised me. I looked at him. What do you mean? He gestured toward the exhibit. You kept all of this, he said. Not because it was valuable, but because it mattered. I felt something tighten in my chest. Yes, I said quietly. He nodded. I think that's what we missed. Footsteps approached from behind. I didn't need to turn. I already knew. Emily, Rebecca. They stopped just inside the exhibit. Their eyes moved across the room, taking it in, processing, but not the same way Jason had. Rebecca's gaze went straight to the medal. Of course it did. But this time, there was something different in her expression. Not calculation. Not immediately. Something closer to uncertainty. It's bigger than I thought, Emily said quietly. I looked at her. Yes, she didn't argue, didn't push, didn't question. She just stood there. Sophie moved closer to the display beside me. She would read those letters out loud, she said softly, glancing at Jason. She still does, Jason replied. I smiled faintly. Not as much anymore. Sophie shook her head. You should, she said. I looked at her. Why? Because people need to hear them, she said. Her voice was steady, certain, and for a moment I saw it. The future. Not in money, not in ownership, but in understanding. Margaret approached quietly from the side. We've had a strong response already, she said gently. People are connecting with it. I nodded. I can see why. She looked at me. Are you all right? I took a breath, then answered honestly. Yes. And for the first time, there was no hesitation. Because this was what it had always been about. Not proving anything, not defending anything, but sharing something real, something meaningful, something true. I looked around the room one last time, at the people walking slowly between the displays. at the quiet attention in their faces, at the way they leaned in, not out of curiosity, but respect. And I realized something. Daniel's story hadn't been lost. It had just been waiting for the right moment, the right place, the right voice, and somehow, that voice had been mine. The exhibition didn't end that day. It grew. Quietly, at first. A few visitors lingering longer than expected. A couple of conversations that stretched beyond polite curiosity. And then, word spread. Within a week, the museum called again. Not Margaret this time, but someone from administration. Polite, measured, careful. "Mrs. Whitcomb, we've had an unusual level of interest in the exhibit," the woman said. I wasn't surprised. "Not anymore." "That's good," I replied. "It is," she said. "But it's also drawing attention from outside our usual audience." I leaned back slightly in my chair. I assumed it might. There was a pause. "Yes," she said. "You were right to." By the second week, there were journalists. Not many. Not overwhelming. But enough. Careful questions. Measured curiosity. Requests for interviews. I declined most of them. Not out of fear, but out of intention. This wasn't about turning Daniel into a headline. It was about letting him remain human. But something else was happening too. Something I hadn't expected. People were writing. Letters, emails, messages left with the museum. Stories. Their stories. About fathers who never spoke. Brothers who came home different. Husbands who carried quiet pieces of something they couldn't explain. And suddenly, Daniel wasn't alone. Sophie sat beside me one evening, reading one of the letters out loud. "They said your story helped them understand their dad for the first time," she said softly. I closed my eyes for a moment, not overwhelmed, but moved, deeply. "That's what this was for," she added. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what it was for." Jason started coming by more often. Not with questions, not with opinions, just presence. He would sit at the kitchen table sometimes in silence, sometimes asking about Daniel. Not the broad things, the small ones. What did he like to eat? Did he ever laugh about anything from that time? What kind of music did he listen to back then? Questions that mattered. Questions that showed he was finally seeing his father as a person, not just a role. Emily came too. More cautiously, more quietly. But she came, and one afternoon she stood in the doorway of the spare room, the one that had once held everything, now mostly empty. "I didn't understand," she said. I looked at her. "I know." She stepped inside slowly. "I thought if something had value, you had to use it, leverage it, turn it into something." I smiled faintly. "You did." She hesitated, but this already was something. "Yes," I said. Her eyes softened slightly. "I'm sorry," she added. The words were simple, but they mattered. "Thank you," I said. Rebecca didn't come at first. Not to the house, not to the museum, not anywhere near any of it. And I didn't call her. I didn't push. Because some realizations can't be forced. Then one afternoon, nearly a month after the exhibition opened, Margaret called. "She's here," she said quietly. I knew who she meant. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I simply went. The museum felt different that day. Busier. fuller, but still respectful, still grounded. And there near the final display, Rebecca stood, alone. She didn't turn when I approached. Not right away. She was looking at the medal, the same way she had before. But not the same way. "You came," I said gently. She nodded. "I did." Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. We stood there for a moment, side by side, looking at the same thing. But maybe, finally seeing it the same way, "I thought it would feel different," she said after a while. "How?" "I thought I'd see what it was worth," she admitted. I didn't respond. "And I do," she continued. I turned slightly toward her, but not the way I expected. She looked at me then, for the first time in weeks. "I was wrong," she said. The words came slowly, like they had weight. "I wasn't seeing him," she added. "I was seeing what I could get from it." I held her gaze, not judging, not correcting, just listening. "I don't know how to fix that," she said. "You don't have to fix it," I replied. "You just have to understand it." She nodded slightly. "I think I do now." We stood there a little longer. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "Can you tell me about him?" I felt something warm settle in my chest. "Yes," I said. "I can." And so I did. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. Enough for her to begin. The exhibition continued for months, longer than originally planned, because people kept coming, kept connecting, kept seeing pieces of themselves in Daniel's story. And eventually, it stopped being just his story. It became something larger. A bridge between silence and understanding, between memory and meaning, between what was hidden and what deserved to be seen. As for me, I stopped guarding the past and started sharing it. Not because I had to, but because I finally understood why it mattered. One evening, long after the museum had closed and the crowds had gone, I stood alone in front of the final display. The medal, the letters, the photograph, and I whispered something I hadn't said in years. "You can rest now," I said softly. "Your story made it, and for the first time, it felt like it had." There's a quiet kind of strength that doesn't demand attention. It doesn't shout. It doesn't prove itself. And often, it goes unnoticed. Until one day, someone chooses to see it. This story isn't just about a collection. It's about how easily we confuse value with meaning, how quickly we measure things in numbers instead of memories, and how often we overlook the quiet sacrifices of the people closest to us simply because they don't come with recognition. Daniel didn't need a record to prove what he had done. He didn't need a medal in a database. Because the truth of who he was lived in the people he protected, the love he gave, and the life he built after everything he carried. And Leonard, someone who was overlooked, dismissed, even doubted, became the voice that ensured that truth would not disappear. Sometimes the most important thing we can do isn't to chase what something is worth, but to protect what it means. Because meaning lasts longer than money. Meaning heals. Meaning connects. Meaning tells the stories that would otherwise be lost. So, here's a question for you. What in your life have you been measuring the wrong way? Is there something or someone you've overlooked because you couldn't immediately see its value? Take a moment. Think about it. And if this story touched you in any way, I'd really love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you believe stories like this matter, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Because sometimes the stories we almost ignore are the ones we need the most.